offering my humble pronouns at the divine lotus feet of my most beloved Bhagwan. Respected elders, dear brothers and sisters, loving salams to you all. We hope that your experience at the Zone 3 virtual pre-world conference so far has been enlightening. In today's Choose Your Own speaker session, we have our very own Uncle Mark Connell from Auckland, New Zealand. By profession, Uncle is a customer services specialist at New Zealand Inland Revenue Department and has been in the SSSIO organization for over 40 years. Uncle has served the organization in various capacities and brings with him experience and wisdom. Today, he will share with us on the topic on how to recognize the ego and methods of letting go of our ego. And now, without taking much time, I would like to welcome Uncle Mark to share with us on this topic.
Om Saram, and greetings brothers and sisters. Welcome to our short talk today on letting go of the ego. Swami says, I like to start with Swami says, each one from ego takes his birth, and clad in ego dies and comes and goes, gives and receives, and earns and spends, and deals and lies or speaks the truth in ego all the while. Those who do away with the ego attain salvation. Remove the roots of egoism from the field of your heart. That is enough. It's from SSSIO Speaks, Volume 5, Chapter 2. Hear that last line? Second last line, sorry. Those who do away with their ego attain salvation. So that's what we're after. And it looks like letting go of the ego is the way to do it. So good luck on that one. So I'm not an authority on letting go of the ego. To even say that is pretty much kind of like the ego itself talking, because the ego is always in there seeking attention. And every one of us will have some experience of letting go of our ego. I'll be sharing my views and insights on the subject, and you can just add those to your own. Sadly, we often get our egos crushed the hard way. Those are all those embarrassing and humbling experiences that seem to continue all too often in life. And I'm sure every single one of us has some stories we could tell, or probably prefer not to tell, of when our ego took a bit of a beating. Sometimes I think when we come to Swami, he allows us just a few more, just to, because he's such a good teacher. We even talk of our ego being bruised, don't we? And once it's bruised, then what do? We kind of nurture it back to life. I find that kind of interesting. With children, we build up their egos, but not too much, because we don't want them to get too full of ourselves. So we build it up, but then we've got to tell them, okay, just keep it steady there. You don't want them to get too vain, too full of themselves. It's just the way life works. It's kind of about balance, and we have to do this with ourselves as well. Again, Swami says, generally, all people are suffering from an incurable disease. It may be to a lesser degree in some, while more severe in others. The difference is only in the severity, but all are suffering from this. It cannot be cured even by expert medical treatment by experienced doctors. This disease is ego. If you think you are so big, inflated with ego, it is only sheer ignorance. If one identifies themselves with divinity, there will be no room for ego. All are divine in this world, and you are also one of the several billions of people. When you realize this truth, where is the scope for ego? It is due to ignorance that one feels egoistic and faces a lot of problems because of this. SSSIO Speaks, Volume 31, Chapter 15. So what is the ego? It seems to be like an invisible sense of self that essentially likes recognition. There may be a lot more to it, but recognition seems to be a key point. That's the conclusion I've come to when I've pondered very deeply on it and what's going on inside, what it is that my ego is actually wanting. So, what is the ego? It seems to be like an invisible sense of self that essentially likes recognition. There may be a lot more to it, but recognition seems to be the key point. That's what I've concluded when I pondered deeply on it and what my ego is really wanting. It seems to be the thing it seems to like is recognition. And it's very clever and elusive. He says, if you think you've got it beaten, there's a good chance it's got you right in its grasp. If I think I'm, egoless, that's probably just the ego itself, because if it's good to be egoless, then the ego will try and appear egoless. So how do we beat it? Awareness, awareness, awareness. What's awareness? Well, you can't make progress in something unless you're aware of what it's doing and how it's working. All of our sadhana, like repeating the name of God, reciting mantras, thinking of God, practicing loving kindness, etc. Those things we do in our everyday life. If we're not aware of these things, it's not going to happen. We read Swami's teachings and we decide this is how we'd like to make our lives. The only way we're going to do that if we become aware that certain behaviors and maybe the way we do things are not the way we should be doing them. If we're not aware of it, we're going to keep on doing that. And so we try and remind ourselves simply by remembering in our mind, or just creating that awareness that's automatic. It becomes more automatic when we mix with good company, when we discuss these things in study circles, when we attend our devotional singing sessions. All this creates a greater awareness and focus in our minds. And remember what Swami said, the famous word, watch. Watch our words, actions, thoughts, character, heart. Wasn't Swami absolutely wonderful with the English language, the way he plucks these little, what would you call that, a mnemonic, out of our language. He also refers to that as self-inquiry. I've heard different fractions, but I've heard it said it's 4/5 of the spiritual path. I like to think of it as that. It's the greater part of the spiritual path, self-inquiry, watching ourselves, our words, actions, thoughts, character, heart. Jack Hislop was really keen on this idea. He used to speak of it in his books. It's making the habit of inquiring into our thoughts and feelings and what's really going on inside. It's about watching them and discriminating to determine what's appropriate, what's motivated by love, and what's motivated by ego. And until we look at something carefully, we might not even realize that there's a subtle ego connection there. And that's what I'm talking about in my talk today. It's because most of us probably are dealing with it, and probably pretty well. But the further we go along the path, the more we have to look for those subtle connections, those subtle influences that still prevent us from making further spiritual progress. And remember, ego is not just about gloating and feeling full of ourselves. Feeling bad about ourselves is also ego, is it not? Because what is feeling bad? It's the ego, is it not? If we're feeling bad, if something's gone wrong, we sang about Bhajan, it went terribly, it was a big flop. What's going to take a beating? It's our ego, isn't it? So if we're feeling bad, we have to think, okay, maybe this is just our ego. We're going to feel a little bit bad, sure, and that's okay. But it's about watching and thinking, okay, what's happening here? Because the end point of all sadhana in terms of practicality in our daily lives is leading happier lives, that we will be happier, is it not? And that's also the result of letting go of the ego too. So we even speak of our wounded pride. If we didn't have an ego about something, then why would we feel bad? And so what does Swami say about beating the ego? Service, does he not? Service is one of the best ways to kill the ego. Let me read again. Swami says, the hands do the work, the tongue performs the task of talking, and the head inquires. All these limbs of the body may be different from each other, but the divine power that exists in them is one and the same. Likewise, the same divinity exists in all beings. Once you understand this truth, the service you render will become divine. One should not become egoistic, thinking that one is doing great service. Actually, service is meant to kill ego. You cannot call it service if it is rendered with ego. First of all, ego has to be subdued. Body attachment is the root cause of ego. Ego will vanish once the body attachment is given up. The spirit of oneness will develop once the ego is annihilated. SSSIO Speaks, Volume 33, Chapter 19. So service is meant to kill the ego, he says. Spirit of oneness will develop once the ego is annihilated. Swami is very heavy on killing, annihilating the ego. So we need to be constantly discriminating. It's easy to fall into the trap of serving to be seen, is it not? Of feeling that we have of, you know, oh, aren't I so good? Or maybe we can't just help ourselves mention it. You know, we're talking to somebody and suddenly we just find ourselves mentioning that, yeah, I was down at the soup kitchen doing such and such the other day, or, oh yeah, we visit the old people on the weekends, and, you know, you might start mentioning things that you've done. So, good idea to ask yourself, am I trying to encourage this person to do service? Or am I kind of, is my ego in there, wanting me to be seen to being, you know, a nice, good person? It's always there, even with service. So it's got to creep in, so we just need to be on top of it. So it can happen in that overt manner, but it's probably more subtle. And that's where I'm coming from, being aware of those more subtle intrusions of the ego. So getting rid of ego is really about being humble, right? But once again, while humility is a prime factor, can't it be nice to be so humble? Aren't I so humble? You know, if the ego sees being humble as a good thing that people will look at and admire, then the ego will do its best to be seen to be such a humble person. You know, aren't I so good? I don't need to be known. But somehow you'll just make sure that somebody else mentions all your good works. You know, you'll just quietly make that happen. Where, of course, well, all the time, you know, well, I'm being so humble, I never bothered to mention it. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have. No, don't bother about that. But inside, you know, your ego's soaring in the skies, thinking, oh, yes, this is great. Yeah, that's the way it works. So we have to watch to keep the purity of intention right. That sort of awareness has to be constant and steady, like keeping a hand on the rudder all the time. It's about balance, as is so much in spiritual life. It's about simply letting go as well, as is also much of spiritual life. So service is great, go for it. However, in reality, most of us are not going to be like Mother Teresa. But Mother Teresa herself said we can do no great things, but we can do small things with great love. So if we do all those small things we do every day with great love, we'll be doing well. What does Swami say? Duty without love is deplorable. Duty with love is desirable. Love without duty is divine. You all know, you'll know. But we're not perfect, we're a work in progress. So we aim at doing these things and keep at it, hopefully steadily improving as time goes by. There's no point in beating ourselves up or wallowing in shame if we don't make it. A bit of guilt can be a good thing. Feeling a little bad just to get us on the right path, but then we have to let it go. We don't want to wallow in it. That's definitely ego. Equanimity is the key. That is what Swami wants. So what are some other things that help drive the ego away? Well, you can give it to Swami. We can be surrendered. We surrender to Swami. Swami helps keep us on keel, so long as we're watching and making the effort. If we're not, well, Swami can arrange it. He's pretty good at arranging ego-beating situations. And I'm sure you've all experienced these. You know, when I read Satyam Shivam Sundaram, the series about Swami's life, his biography essentially by Professor Kasturi, I remember some of the stories there where Swami, you know, gave him experiences that were so humbling, sometimes very publicly so. It must have been a real tough battle for him, but he was a very great man, Professor Kasturi. But when he tells these stories that show how Swami just created situations where, you know, to bring the ego down in no uncertain terms, it's very humbling reading them, to be honest. And of course it was very humbling for Kasturi, and he shared these so openly and so lovingly. I remember when Jack Hislop was in Brisbane, Australia, at a conference. It was about 1991, I think. I heard the story third hand from someone else who attended from New Zealand. And it came time to start the conference. There's an announcement on stage. Look, we'll be starting soon. We're just waiting for the keynote speaker to arrive. It was Jack Hislop. And then there's a little bit of commotion down the back, and I said, no, he's here. He's sitting here, and there's Jack Hislop sitting down the back, just quietly waiting for everything to get going. Now, if you're the speaker at a conference, you know, you'll probably likely be met at the airport by, you know, some important person. They'll take you to the conference, settle you into your room, and, You know, then you'll come out, you'll meet all the bigwigs, the people in charge of everything, the president, this president, that president, all the people in the know and who are organising things. And you know, that's a good right feel for the ego to start feeling pretty good about itself. But not Jack. No, he just quietly went in. He was there to do his thing. He quietly comes into the hall and he sits quietly down in the back, waiting to be called. Nobody even knew. Most didn't even know he was there. He was a very humble man and a great practitioner of Swami's teachings. Read his books if you haven't. I love them. Highly recommend them. Sam Sandweiss. You all know Sam Sandweiss. He wrote The Holy Man and the Psychiatrist and a couple of other books. Wonderful books. Had a lot of wonderful experience. So Sam's a psychiatrist. You know, you don't get to be a psychiatrist by not knowing much. But you know, I heard him talking. It might have even been at the same conference, but it was also at a Brisbane conference, Brisbane gathering. And I watched with intrigue this talk. You know, it was a wonderful talk. He gave several of them. I enjoyed every one of them. But what he kept saying throughout the talk, and at one point he said, "Look, I hate to keep harping on, but you know, I really do know nothing," because he kept repeating this. He kept repeating, because I really know nothing, because he had experienced Swami in such a deep and profound way, and Swami just baffled all his understanding. Here is a man who's extremely well educated, a practicing psychiatrist, very intelligent, discerning man, but he realized that he didn't know nothing. Whatever he thought he knew, Swami would give him a situation so easily to just overturn it. You'd find, you know, well-educated, really strong men with a big position in life can come into the room with Swami, and in a few minutes they might be crying on the floor, weeping, or very sad. You know, they can just change that. They're like out of control. They had no control over the situation when you're with Swami. Anything can happen. And so that made him very humble. And I realized listening to him that was a point to get to. That was like a stage of development. He actually genuinely believed he knew nothing. Now, I could have said I knew nothing, but it wouldn't have been true, because I thought I knew something. I still think I know something. I'm sitting here talking to you, though I was asked to do this. I did not jump at the opportunity. So that idea of knowing nothing is, I believe, at least anyway, is something we can aspire to. It's very easy to say it, but to truly believe that I know nothing and I'm surrendered to Swami and he knows everything, easier said than done. And that's, again, if we're watching carefully, it's very subtle. We have to have that awareness. You know, there's a strong tendency in human nature to want to teach. In our organisation, so Swami's gone now, his physical body. And I remember people asking, who's going to be a successor? People who didn't know anything about Swami or his organisation. And that was a strange thing for us, wasn't it? Because, you know, we don't think of Swami. Swami hasn't got a successor. There is no successor. No one is the guru in the Sai organisation. Only Swami. There is only one guru. Swami is it. That's why we will often refer to his words, because it's what Swami says that counts. In fact, whenever you hear Jack, if you hear Jack Hislop talk, tapes of his talk, which I recommend you listen to, he'll always said, as soon as a question was asked, he'd start, well, Swami says. He would give you Swami's words on it. Now, this idea of teaching, I mention this because it's very strong in people, and maybe just in a subtle way. It's not like you might not even be wanting to go out there and be a guru, but that idea of wanting to teach is actually quite strong. In very simple terms, it might be like when we're talking to somebody, we're wanting them to listen to us. I think it was Stephen Covey who said, you know, people aren't listening to understand, they're mostly listening to reply. Because, you know, I want you to listen to me. You know, we're not always wanting to listen to them. And it's that sort of, in a subtle way, that's that idea that we want to tell other people how things should be and what they should be doing. So for me, I long ago gave up seeking for positions in centres and Sai Baba centres. It wasn't a big thing for me, but enough to require attention. It's got subtler now, but I think I'm reasonably under control there. I don't feel it's a problem. But being a guru is an attractive idea. And aren't there many would-be gurus? Not us, of course, but, other people. Once we had one of Swami's students here, and he was a very dedicated, very hardcore Swami Sai student. He was great. And he went around to some of the different centres, and sometimes, now and again, at a centre, he'd hear somebody talking after bhajans, giving a talk, not just giving a reading, but actually giving a talk. I remember he said to me one day, because he didn't like this, and he said, one should ask oneself, look, has Swami asked me to talk? And if he hasn't, then why are you talking? And I thought, yeah, that's very, very simple, but very good. Swami said, has Swami told me to talk? Then why am I standing up here talking to people? Who am I to give these people a lecture? You might give a reading, give Swami's words or whatever, but that's it. Anything more than that, unless it's appropriate to the occasion, like, you're having a conference, you're all there to share and learn about Swami's teachings. But if not, it's like, who are we to be talking? And what is it that's driving that? What's the driving force? In study circles, hope we all attend study circles, they're great. But when we're sharing study circles, we should avoid saying you, because I don't want you to tell me how to do something. I want you to tell me how you do it. If I'm talking about meditation, there's no point in me telling them how it should be done. I should just be telling them, well, this is what I do. This is what Swami says, and this is what I practice, and this is the results I get out of it. And it's the same for every aspect of Swami's teachings. If we're in a study circle, the word you should generally be banned. Okay, so always just think in terms of, I can share my experience, but they don't need me to hear me telling them what to do. I should just be sharing how I actually do it. So please be aware of that. Awareness, awareness, awareness. And of course, in our centres, what's another field that's ripe for tempting the ego? Bhajans, bhajans, bhajans. Bhajans can be kind of like a minefield, can't it? Now, I know sometimes we might not want to admit that, but if you really look at it, it's very true. There can be a lot of ego in bhajans. It's like, for a start, what are we doing? We're all singing. We're lead singing. I'm talking about lead singing here mostly. So, what's the immediate egotistical thought? Oh, aren't I a wonderful singer? Now, we might not be like that, but sometimes it might be hard to get out of the bhajan without having that thought. If you've led a bhajan, I wonder if my bhajan went well. Oh, nobody's come and told me I sang my bhajan really well. Maybe you've never had any of that happen to you. I have to admit I have, but that's probably just me. Or maybe it was a terrible bhajan, and suddenly you're crushed because you sang a bhajan and it did not go well. Or, another one, and I've seen this, I've heard this at least anyway. They went to a practice, and somebody went to a practice and they weren't allowed to lead, or they didn't get chosen to lead a bhajan, because you can only pick so many to lead each week, and they didn't lead a bhajan. Maybe it happened a couple of times, and so they felt offended and they went off to another centre because they didn't let me lead a bhajan. I mean, at some point you've got to put a lid on these things. This is all ego. And there's other things in there too, like singing alaps. Swami says don't sing alaps. So what's making us sing them? If Swami said that, just let it go. Do it somewhere else. But don't need to do it at bhajans. Fanciful singing, it's not the place for fanciful singing. So if you like to sing, if you've got a well-trained voice and you can do that, bhajans is not the place for it. Just let it go. If we're wanting to do that and we're finding all sorts of excuses why we should be able to sing alaps, why we should do this fanciful singing, if we're finding reasons, we need to ask ourselves, what's the driving force? And I'm pretty sure I know what the answer will be if we're honest with ourselves. Also, this is not so common, but sometimes there's a performance going on with the person doing the lead singing. Generally, Swami encourages stillness. Okay, so not our hands out here and there with every movement, exaggerated facial expressions as we sing our song. You can't help but get a sense that when a person is doing that they're putting on a performance for someone, and I don't think it's Swami. And fear of singing. that's been one of the real benefits of devotional singing for a lot of people who would have sung in front of other people before. So we've actually learned to do that. We've gained in confidence. We've probably improved our singing voices, and that's really good. But again, it's a matter of keeping it in balance. If we have a fear of singing, that's ego too, is it not? Again, so it's about watching, watching, watching. Always seeing what this ego is doing and where it's got hold of us. So what's the answer? Give it to Swami. Like everything, give it to God. Think of God as the doer and ourselves as the instruments. If you've got one of those little calendars with a daily thought, like a flip over calendar where there's a thought for each day. If you look on March 27th, this is the quote. Swami says, God gave you the time, space, cause, material, idea, skill, chance, and fortune. Why should you feel as if you are the doer? March 27th, just remember that date. Go and check it out on the calendar if you've got one, or buy a calendar. It's great to have a thought for the day. The time, space, cause, material, skill, he goes on. Why should I feel as if I am the doer? And I believe that's one of the good ways of getting rid of the ego. I think, I do actually lead bhajans, but I like to remember that to never take it for granted. It's like, if I can lead them, it's because of Swami. I feel if I want to think that it's me or start getting egotistical about it, he can take that away any time. It's Swami that sings. The way I like to think of it, it's Swami that sings, it's Swami that listens, and Swami himself is the song. I believe if we truly focus on it like that, then our song will be like a meditation, if we can lead it perfectly like that. And so there's little tests we can do. For example, if we've done something, what if no one knows about this? You might have heard it said that a person's true character is revealed in what they do when no one is watching. So when you're able to say, maybe there's money there somewhere, maybe you're alone, you find some money somewhere, it's not yours, and nobody's going to miss it, and it's not actually going to hurt anybody if it goes, but you really shouldn't take it. What will you do? It can be like a temptation, because we can certainly find lots of reasons why we should have it. We can make things like that seem so okay, like it's all good. So it's what we do when nobody's watching. That's the test of our character. So another really, really good question. What if someone else gets the credit? Now that's a really tough one. And I wouldn't try rushing into something like that too, but imagine how would we feel then. Maybe you've organized something and somebody else gets the credit. You did a big event, somebody else gets the credit. Maybe you gave something to somebody. Maybe you did some service, there was a whole service thing going on. All these things we can do within our psi world, our psi centers. And somebody else got the credit. And it was your idea, or it was your little baby. Can you let it go? That is really, really difficult. I would find that difficult. And I believe most people would. But just think about it, because in terms of, I hope it doesn't happen for you. But in terms of letting go of the ego, it's got good food for insight when you ponder on how you might feel in that situation. Good food for insight. And of course, give credit where credit's due. We don't always need to compare to each other's. If you're a student, somebody does well in the exams, top class, don't try to be the top of the class. Just try to be the best you can be, and be happy for other people if they succeed and get better marks than you. This is the way we should be. This is ego. This is letting go of the ego. It's letting go of the ego. We can ask ourselves, do I need to be the singer, harmonium player, tabla player, dramatist, speaker, actor, or whatever? Do we need to be that person that's out there in the front lines being seen? Do I really need to get on the mic and say this? Am I about to grab the mic and share my words of wisdom with everybody? Why do they need to hear me? Is it really necessary? If somebody's got something organized, why should I be grabbing the mic? Am I in the program? So they've got it organized, and I probably wasn't there, so why should I be grabbing the mic and sharing my wisdom? So think of those what if type questions to test our ego. But we should always be watching our thoughts and feelings. And like I said, balance is the key. But don't be too humble, because if you have a good voice, sing. No point in sitting there saying, no, it's okay, let somebody else sing it. If you've got a good voice, look, sing. And we need to remind ourselves what's important in life. If we're truly acting with love, then ego is less likely. Like I said, don't compete. Be happy when others do well. Do not compare yourself to others. If you do so, you'll become vain and bitter. That's actually a quote from Desiderata, for those of you who know that. Christianity. Christianity is very strong on this point. Jesus was very strong on this point of getting rid of the ego. It was such a strong thing. I mean, the crucifixion is, among other things, a victory over the ego, is it not? And what does Swami say about what the cross means? Cut the I feeling clean across and let the ego die on the cross to endow a new eternity. I mean, what a wonderful, wonderful symbology. I never would have thought of that. But let the ego, the I feeling, cut the I feeling clean across. And as you cut the I feeling, you're making a cross. Cut the I feeling clean across and let the ego die on the cross to endow a new eternity. That in itself is a wonderful Christian message. That's talking about cutting the ego down. I'm just going to read you something which is from a Christian source, though it was anonymous. It says, it's called Do You Have the Victory? And it sums up knocking off the ego very well and the essence of Jesus' teachings. It goes like this: when you are forgotten or neglected or purposely set at naught, and you can smile inwardly, glorying in the insult or the oversight, that is victory. When your good is evil spoken of, when your wishes are crossed, your tastes offended, your advice disregarded, your opinion ridiculed, and you take it all in patient and loving silence, that is victory. When you are content with any food and raiment, any climate and society, any solitude, any interruption, that is victory. When you can bear with any discord, any irregularity, any unpunctuality, any annoyance, that is victory. When you can stand face to face with waste, folly, extravagance, spiritual insensibility, and endure it all as Jesus endured it, that is victory. When you never care to refer to yourself in conversation, or to record your own good works, or to seek after commendation, when you can truly love to be unknown, that is victory. So in summary, brothers and sisters, be aware. Just first be aware. That'll lead you to beating the ego. It will lead us on the right path. Keep that awareness in mind. Awareness, awareness, awareness. Give it to God. God is the doer, not me. God is the doer. Remember, we are not the body. The ego is about body identification. In fact, I like to often think, if I've got a problem, if I'm unhappy, if something's wrong, what's the problem? It's body identification. Always the basic problem, basic underlying problem for anything. Any problem you've got, I can tell you now, is body identification. Serve, whether little or big, let it be an offering to God and the other person. And it may not be some psi activity that's happening, some big service thing. Every day when we're talking with other people in some way, if we can just serve, even if it's just speaking nicely to them, then that's good. And I remember Swami once said, at least if you cannot do any good, at least do no harm. That too is service. And even that can be challenging, but it's very simple. So be humble. Let it go, let it go, let it go. Keep letting it go. That's what getting rid of the ego is about. Do not compare to others. Do not compare yourself to others. Find your own what-if type questions to test for the ego. You know, what if this happened? What if somebody else got the credit? What if nobody was watching me? Would I still be feeling the same? When we're sharing, think in terms of I and not you. I and we. So I did this, or we did this, or we should do this, not you. Think in terms of I and we. We should talk about our own experiences. Remember the cross. Cut the I feeling clean across. And of course we must love, love, and love again. And finally, obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. Om Saram.
Saram, thank you, Uncle Mark, for sharing with us your experiences and learnings. Indeed, the best way to keep up on our ego is making sure we watch our words, actions, thoughts, character, and our heart. And definitely the path to service will help us to calm our egos. And as you said, we cannot do great acts of service, we cannot do big acts of service, but doing small things with great love will surely make a difference. It will surely purify our hearts. It will surely make us more loving. It will surely help us to realize that it is not I who is doing it, but it's Swami who is doing it, and we are just instruments of Swami. Thank you for sharing this with us, Uncle. Now we'll open the floor for questions. Uncle, we have a few questions from the participants here today.
Sure.
So our first question is, Uncle, as you said earlier, that bhajans can be a source of ego, and bhajans is open to a lot of ego. How do we address that at the center level?
Yeah, it's a big question, but a really good one, because I think if we're honest, it's like the elephant in the room sometimes, and there's always something going on in the world of bhajan's devotional scene in our centres. It's probably in committee meetings, I'm sure, all over the world. I'm sure every single centre is the same. They've probably thrashed out bhajans so many times in their committee meetings about how things should be done, what bhajans they should sing, local language or Sanskrit, etc. And that itself is an ego challenge, discussing these things. And so, like you just said about doing small things with great love, I think with everything we do in the centre, so whatever questions these come tonight, we must always remember that love must be there in the background, or in the foreground even, not in the background. So we must always have love, love, love. Truly this is the teachings, this is what Jesus emphasized so much, this is what Swami has emphasized so much. We so often think in terms of practices and sadhana and rituals, but that love is really the prime factor that Swami emphasizes so much. And if we approach it like that, and if we all create, a culture of speaking and reacting with and acting with love to each other, between each other and with each other, then that will really help solve the problem itself. Whatever actual ideas we might think up, just approaching it like that will help anyway. That will help remove our ego, it will help remove all our ego. So cultivating this attitude of love, that so that when we even discuss things, that we understand, look, that it's not acceptable to descend into language that is not pleasant or specifically unpleasant. So it's like sort of like a background about the atmosphere in which we must discuss these things, and it's a bit difficult. It's actually quite challenging, because you might not just sit there, for example, at a bhajan practice and suddenly bring up, let's have a discussion on ego in our bhajans tonight, because they're probably not going to want to do it, and a lot of people probably understand it anyway. I think it's probably better to have a separate forum, like a satsang, where you're having some sort of study circle or discussion where people are asked to talk about, how do you think the ego creeps into bhajans, and let people bring forth their own ideas so that everybody realizes, yeah, there is something to look at here. And everybody might share all sorts of different ideas, just like I shared a few there, about how it does creep in and what the reality actually is. Because if we're honest, it's reality is different, and it's so very important, because if we've got ego in there, we're not singing with love to the Lord, to our form of God, and we need to be singing with love. not with ego. So it's not going to have that purity, and we want that purity of intention. One little thing I like to always remind myself and remind others of is that we let's presume most of us will probably be going to the bhajans once a week, and so somebody might say, "Oh, are you singing tonight?" You know, they'll mean leading. So mostly talking about lead singing here. That's where the challenge is for the ego. It's in leading generally. So somebody might say, are you singing tonight? And so I know they mean leading, but they'll say, "Are you singing tonight?" You know, you'll say, "Yeah," and maybe tell them what they're, or I said, "Did you sing a song?" So sometimes, you know, I don't want to try and be clever or sound too clever or be smart, but to make a point, sometimes I think it's good to say, "Yep, I'm actually singing." You know, I don't know why. A lot of cities here got into singing 9 bhajans. There's no rule in the SSSIO organization that says you only have to sing a certain number of bhajans, but often we seem to sing 9 songs. And I like to say, actually, I'm singing, as long as I know the words, I'll be singing all 9 bhajans. You know, people just forget. You know, it's like, "Are you singing tonight?" Yes, I am. I'm singing every single bhajan. And let's make sure we sing every single bhajan. And when we think of it like that, I believe it does take the ego out of it. I'm not there to have the world hear my voice parading before everybody. I'm just there to sing all these songs with love. It does not matter if I do not lead my bhajan. Nobody needs to hear me. But if I'm there and I contribute and I lead my song, that's fine. But my duty is to go and sing there with love. And so whether I sing 1 or whether I sing all 9 or 10 or however many we're singing, let me try and sing all of them with as much love as I can. And I think if we, for me, that I find that really useful. I find it kind of humbling thinking of it like that. Yes, I am singing every single song. And so, yeah, you can I can go on at length about this, but that's one little method. And like try and create some discussion around it if you can, because I think it really helps, and I think it will help the energy of the bhajans to be so much better. We all do bhajans pretty well, but I still think we still don't exploit the full potential. So yeah, look, good luck with that. So
Thank you, Uncle. Indeed, I think as you mentioned, love is the foundation for bhajans, and definitely love is what we bring with us to the center and should be expressed through bhajans. So definitely, thank you for sharing that with us. Definitely, we will all remember next time we go for bhajans that we need to make sure we're singing with love, and it doesn't matter if we're lead singers or part of the chorus. We will need to make sure that love is there. Uncle, our next question is, it seems like a lot of trouble to always be analyzing what we're doing, what we're thinking, etc. Is this really necessary? It kind of seems like an overkill, like a psychological analysis. So, Uncle, the question is basically, is it really important to analyze each and every action throughout the day? Because it is a bit overwhelming. It is like an overkill for some of us. So, would you like to share how we can or what we can do in this type of scenario?
Sure. No, I know what you mean. It does. I know. Look, for some people who are listening, if they're listening at all, I hope I didn't turn you off halfway through my talk, because for me, I'm into that. My wife gives me a bit of a hard time about this too. I will sort of analyze a bit, but it will be a little bit psychological probably. So I probably tend to get a little bit intense about it maybe. But I honestly think it's good to be. So you don't have to be really intense. I think it's about making a practice, like all sadhana. It's about making a practice, cultivating that awareness that I mentioned, awareness, making a practice of just quietly being aware of thoughts without trying to make it something that's stressful, that makes you feel like you've always got to be that somehow making an effort. We want it to be a little relatively effortless, like most habits are. So that's why if we make something a practice, it seems more effortless. But I have to return to Swami's words, of course, because he does actually encourage this. You know, he does talk about the self-inquiry being forfeits of the spiritual path. And so I believe it is very important, because if we don't, then we do miss it. There's what's going on in our mind and what's really driving things. And I find it really quite enlightening, if you like, or insightful, inspiring when I spot things that where it's a bit of an aha. Like, it's one thing to understand things, and I think the important thing is to understand that we're never going to understand God mentally. We won't. It's not going to happen because it can't be done. Somehow we'll have because ultimately being God is just simply being, isn't it? I can't describe it in words, even though I'm trying to. So just make it a practice. Just try and make it a quiet practice that if you really enjoy doing that, you can go into it. Avoid getting into big discussions where you're splitting hairs over things like, the meaning of a word. Just discuss it lightly. Don't get too intense about it in that sense, especially when you're discussing it, because it yields nothing in the end. Well, that's what I was... Insight. It's one thing to understand things. So what I was saying is we're not going to understand being God. It's just something you have to experience. But when we are pondering on things, when we are reflecting and watching our words, actions, thoughts, character, heart, etc., it's not so much what we understand mentally. It's just in that pondering and that reflection. Suddenly you have one of those aha moments and something just seems clearer. We'll be in a study circle listening to somebody explain their point of view about something. Something about their experience or the story they tell or the way they explain it. It just becomes clearer. Might not even be so much of a big aha, but somehow you just understand it. And that's what I believe is an insight. It's something you understand, and you probably can't even explain it, even as soon as you have that insight in words. But somehow you grasp the idea. And that's enlightening, if you like. And so I think as we watch our words, actions, thoughts, etc., I think we will experience these moments a lot more. And I think that's very important. And because Swami says, like I hear Swami say, I tend to come back to that. If you listen to any of Jack Hislop's talks, you will hear, I mentioned, he tends to say, in fact, the minute the question finished, when I was listening to him, I used to notice it was like barely a fraction of a second. And he just goes straight away, well, Swami says, and he just started Swami's words about the subject. It was just quite amazing. Because it is about what Swami says, not about my thoughts on the situation, however good or bad they might be. That's what Swami says. Some people say they don't like hearing people always talk about, well, Swami says this. But in the end, that is what we're here for, Swami did say this. And what he says is the truth. And, we have to reflect on it and ponder on it and see how it applies to us. But, and we want to always be careful that, all religions suffer the same fate, where sometimes people try and use the words in Scripture to justify not following the words in Scripture of their own religion. Every religion will experience that. Christianity and Psi places were not so different. Sometimes people use words from the Scripture to try and justify doing stuff that's actually not in conformity with Scripture. Now, that sounds like a bit of a psychological analysis, but that happens. So that was just making a point that, yeah, look, I come back to what Swami says, and Swami does encourage us to watch our words and thoughts and to ponder on them. And I honestly, truly believe that really helps. But again, let's not forget love. Let's not forget love.
Thank you, Uncle. Indeed, we need to watch. So this question is more like doing a sadhana. As you said, we need to make it a habit. We need to practice it, and by practicing, we'll be perfect. And then slowly, we won't even think about what we're thinking or analyzing. It will automatically happen. So definitely, we need to take it up as a sadhana. And as you mentioned earlier as well, watch. Swami emphasizes on this a lot, and I think it is a very handy tool as well to help us keep our egos intact. Uncle, let's move to the next question now. When do we know our ego is really beaten?
Yeah, well, yeah. In some ways, I don't know if when we're enlightened, when we've reached Godhead and we're just sitting there totally unperturbed by everything. Yeah, I think at one point I did mention that the and like Swami says, the aim of all sadhana is the purification of the heart. And in simple terms, in everyday life, it's about living happier lives. All the study, we actually sit there, and sometimes in study circles, they tend to follow a theme, if you like, or often have this energy about them that we're reading the Swami's words and all feeling like it's so difficult to put all these teachings into practice. We feel very challenged by it and almost anguished. But in the end, I think it's great to remember that the end result of all these spiritual teachings, whatever religion you belong to, is leading a happier life, a happy life. And don't we all want to lead a happy life? I think it was, who was it? I was thinking the other day about, I think it was a story about John Lennon. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was John Lennon. Had teacher asked the kids a question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they wrote it down on a piece of paper. John Lennon wrote, I want to be happy. And the teacher gave it back to him and wrote on it something like, I think it was, I don't think you understood the question. And John Lennon's response was, I don't think you understand life. And he was just a kid. And isn't that the truth? What we're talking about here is being happy. And so on the one hand, we think about these things and all these things going through our head, but it's only really the love that makes us happy ultimately. And so we always have to try and connect with that love by being good and kind and everything to other people, and being supportive even in our bhajans and devotional singing. And so we know we're beating the ego when we're happier and things are perturbing us less. In reality, in life, when things are not getting to us so much, we're not so sensitive, we find we're not being offended by things, that's probably a very good sign. But also, like I said, if we're at a point where we're actually consciously thinking to ourselves, oh, I think I've got over my ego. Well, who is going to say, oh, I think I've got over my ego, but the ego itself, So again, we cannot stop watching it. It's there. It really is something we've got to be very, very careful of. It's you think you've conquered it. We might think that, but it's a real challenge to do so properly. Just like general spirituality, we might think we're advancing. We have to be careful about, because that's the ego. We want to think we're advancing, and it's good, and we probably are. But how we approach it, we can easily slip into traps of suddenly thinking we're some kind of guru. And that actual reality of achieving self-realization compared to the billions of people on earth is not something a lot of people achieve. But most of us been devotees for a long time, so it's actually time some of us started becoming self-realized. I'm very happy to help anybody become self-realized if I can do something. Somebody wants to help me, that's great too. Let's not forget, this is the aim of life. Just believe that God came to help us do that in this very life, because the avatar's here. What a better time it is to do it. So keep faith and have the absolute faith that we can achieve that in this life, and that ego will be beaten. But it may be the only time we really know is when we are resting in the hand of God, and in a beautiful sense of love and peace and absolute bliss. Ananda. Om Sara.
Thank you, Uncle. Indeed, being happy is the greatest sign that we know that we have really beaten our ego, because whenever we have ego, it's definitely not a good feeling, not a very nice feeling. So definitely being happy is overcoming our ego, being happy in whatever situation that life puts us in, and having love for everything. So thank you for sharing that, Uncle. Dear participants, that brings us to the end of today's Choose Your Own Speaker session. We thank you all for your participation, and I hope we all have learned something to keep our egos in check. Uncle, we thank you for your time. Really appreciate the experiences and learnings that you have shared with us today to help us keep our ego in control and to rise above the ego. We offer our love and gratitude to you. Dear participants, we thank you once again. Please stay tuned for the next session of the conference. Take care. Jai Sai Ram.
Sada.